Everyone, welcome to the Gamasutra Twitch channel. My name is Brian Francis, the invisible voice inside your head. I am here today playing a very cool game, very excited to play it, Star Wars Battlefront 2. I'm going to try and get through this intro as quickly as possible. In the lower left-hand corner, I am joined by Alex Warrow. Alex, who are you? Why are you here?
Hi, what a deep question. Today, I'm an editor at Gamasutra.com, and I'm joining you for a stream with a very special guest. Very special guest. Could you tell the fine folks in the audience who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my mom also says I'm very special. My name is Mitch Dyer. I'm a writer at Motive Studios in Montreal, and we made this video game that you're playing, Star Wars Battlefront 2. We made the campaign.
Yeah. I'm super excited. So the first Battlefront did not have a campaign.
Correct.
And now the second one has one that follows Inferno Squadron, which is a group of like special forces for the Empire in the days after Return of the Jedi.
Man, I don't even have to be here. You've got this.
Yeah, just a quick catch-up. We're on, actually, the home planet of our hero, Iden Versio. Am I saying that right?
Iden Versio.
Iden Versio. We're on our home world, here to do an extraction, and things are going south because it looks like we're dropping some storms on this planet and killing everyone in a slower way than the Death Star does. So that's fun.
Pretty much.
At least Alderaan had like, you know, it was quick.
It was quick.
That's dark. I am going to just do a couple bit of housekeeping before we get started. So, as we do in all streams, we play the game, and then we're going to ask questions, Mitch, about writing it. Just for the audience today, just a brief reminder, since there's been a lot of talk about the multiplayer into this game, Mitch comes from the writing team, so we aren't going to be asking a lot of questions about that. And as always, we ask folks to please keep it, you know, professional and friendly, like we do here at Gamasutra.
We're here to hang out, man. We're having a good time.
We're having a good time. I'm going to jump off with the first question from my list. So the first cool thing is that Star Wars games have actually sort of like, they've gone up and down in quality over the years. They've told stories that are like core parts of the canon or like completely like things that are forgotten and thrown away. Is that the door? That's the door. So I think the most interesting tradition is that Star Wars games have spent a lot of time telling tales from the perspective of Imperial soldiers. What's kind of like, what approach did you take in following that tradition, and why do you think these characters are worth following?
So, I mean, I was always fascinated with the dark side, the people that grew up in the dark side, right? Like, you look at these iconic characters like Darth Maul and Boba Fett and Darth Vader and all these people who are visually interesting and have cool characteristics, but you don't really get to spend a ton of time seeing the main story from their perspective. You get glimpses as we cut away to Vader and Palpatine and all these people. You get to see the effects they have on people, like they do it with Lando on Bespin in The Empire Strikes Back. But you get very little insight into the day-to-day operations of their lives. In the same way you see Han solving problems and trying to fix the Falcon with Leia on the way to wherever they're going to get saved. Right? Like, you don't get that exposure to those people in the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And growing up, I always thought it would be interesting to see that story, and we never really got it. It's kind of been missing. This element of Star Wars has been missing for me. So for us, we wanted to create people in the Empire, and not just badasses that looked cool and were fun to play, but people you could relate to and understand and have sympathy for and disagree with and be frustrated with. So we have kind of a spectrum in the three characters we see here, and now I'm just talking over maybe arguably the most pivotal moment in the entire game.
Yeah.
We get to see Iden and Hask and Del, the three members of Inferno Squad who are family, friends, they've been with each other for years, reaching a point of tension and conflict that is extremely personal, where there's a massive disagreement about philosophy in the Empire and the kind of things the Empire should be responsible for and doing to keep people safe in the galaxy. And this is the moment in the game where we're kind of breaking the family apart. We're shattering them with their different visions of the Empire and what the Empire stands for.
So I wonder, you talk about growing up and wanting to see more of these villains. Growing up, did you see yourself becoming a game developer?
Oh, no, in no way. And even I came from the press, and I've always wanted to be in the press, right? Like, I grew up reading video game magazines and thought, man, it would be the best job in the world to play video games all day and then write my thoughts about them and talk to people who make them. And it was the best, man. I loved doing that. I did it for like almost 10 years. But hearing about that and learning all the trade secrets and the way things get done, it sounded like such an interesting challenge. and I never really thought of myself as having the skill set or the tools to really make a game.
Yeah.
But it came with a lot of. I had really great mentors. Like I learned a lot from Amy Hennig and Walt Williams, who's my co-writer on this project, and he wrote Spec Ops, which is one of the most incredible video game stories ever. Brian,
So-
you should sneak past these people.
Oh,
No pressure.
Combat's hard here, man. You just had a burn-in notice issued on you. You are in a troublesome situation right now.
I will admit, as always, talking and playing games is difficult. Mitch,
Just don't die.
Yeah, okay, we made it here.
Easy.
Mitch, I actually recently was chatting with an acquaintance who works on Star Wars Rebels, and he said something interesting to me, which is that given the somewhat trying events of this year, it's been hard for him to wear his Imperial shirt. Like, he said, like, he was a person who's very much like, oh, yeah, Empire's cool, and, like, had that. And I've heard this from a lot of fans who are, like, sort of, they love Star Wars, they like the good versus evil stuff, but the Empire holds a special place in their heart. But for him, it was very hard to just wear that shirt this year. How did you sort of balance? I mean, like, these guys, the Empire is the bad guys. Like, how did you balance that in your own creative sense when you were working on this project?
Yeah, it comes down to making sympathetic people who are on the wrong side. And at no point in this game do we ever assert that the Empire is right? Like, we don't want you to play Battlefront 2 and walk away going, man, you know what? Vader was right all along. His redemption has been compromised, and that doesn't work anymore. Because the Empire Star Wars is black and white. It is good and evil. It is light and dark. And even though we have glimpses of lightness in the Empire with Iden and Del, they were part of something dark. Right, they were on the dark side. They were fighting for the villains, and the story is about coming to terms with that. It's about seeing kind of light people born into dark side circumstances who kind of have light in them, and we're seeing that here on Bardos, where Iden is at this point. Sorry, at exactly the moment you're at, Iden is trying to get to her ship to get Imperial civilians from an Imperial planet to safety aboard her Imperial ship run by her Imperial crew. And when you get there, you're going to defend your Imperial crew from enemy Imperials. It's a fracture point. It's a divide in the Empire, but Iden is still, at this point in her mind, she's with the Empire. Things have just gone, this is just tilting in the wrong direction. Something went wrong. I'm going to fix this. And then throughout the rest of the campaign, you realize that it's kind of unfixable because we aren't the kind of things that we want to fix are not the same kinds of things that the Empire wants to fix.
Do you think the main character in this game is evil?
No, I very specifically think that she lived a lot of her life doing villainous things for villainous people, for villainous intent, because she was brainwashed.
Yeah.
She was never exposed to other ways of thinking, and ended up having to make decisions on behalf of an evil organization.
Yeah, right on. So I asked because I'm always interested in games and writing in games that tries to explore the degrees and depth of evil, and doesn't just paint it as a monolith, right? I mean, I think of like a game like Tyranny that does something really interesting in that kind of space. I know this is a more cinematic story, so there's a certain arc that I imagine you guys were going for. But when you're putting together the beats and you're putting together dialogue and background and stuff, how do you write a character that does evil things but is still sympathetic to the player?
It comes through a lot in design and writing have to go hand in hand, right? Like the stuff you're doing, the stuff the player is doing moment to moment in the levels has to be coherent with what the narrative is at that point.
Yeah.
So if the story is the rebellion is bad, we're good, we are protecting the Empire, and that's our job. Ideally, you're not having too much of a difficult time shooting rebels, even though you spent potentially 40 years looking at them as the heroes, because they are.
Yeah.
We try to put you in the mindset of somebody who works for the other side and has different intent, and because we get to get a glimpse of who these people are under the helmets, we get to see what they believe, what they fight for, what they agree about with each other, what they disagree with each other about, their different points of view about the Empire and the rebellion and each other and their goals. So on the page, when we're writing it, we try to do things that are interesting, that make them different members of the squad relatable in different ways. They give you different perspectives that you can latch onto and say, yes, Gideon Hask is right. The rebellion is the villain. They must be crushed. And these psychopathic things he's saying are totally right. Or you can listen to somebody who's a little more compassionate and definitely leaning more toward, the Empire isn't what it used to be. I joined it because I wanted to restore order to the galaxy, and it seems like we're just kind of perpetuating chaos. It doesn't really make sense to me. Mm-hmm. You can hear these different points of view, and you get the different layers of somebody who grew up with and lived for the Empire, and hopefully that exposes you to different facets of people within it, right? Because sometimes you don't always agree with the people around you at work or your social life or whatever, but it doesn't make you enemies.
Yeah.
But sometimes you do hit a breaking point, whether it's in a personal relationship, a romantic relationship, in your professional life. Sometimes you hit a limit, and it reveals to you the kind of things that you really want.
So let's zero in on the idea of relationships at work, because you mentioned that, and I think you're quite correct based on our experience talking to other devs, that these kind of stories come together where design and narrative teams meet, right? And how they work together determines how well a story plays out in a game. Mm-hmm. You're uniquely qualified in that, as you mentioned, this is your first big project as a game dev, to the best of my knowledge, at least.
It's my first any project.
Yeah,
it just happens to be a big one.
And what's interesting is, like, most of our audience are actually making games themselves, and many of them may not be on the narrative team. They may be on the design team or the engineering team or something else, and they may not have the same perspective that you do about how to craft a good level, a good campaign, that kind of thing. So I wonder, could you go back and maybe share any specific examples of where you and Walt, anyone else on the narrative team, had to work with the design team to make something work? Like any specific challenges you faced in, like, laying out a level or getting a story to play out correctly, and how you dealt with it?
Interesting. Oh man.
No pressure.
No, I'm just like, let me just think back through the 13, 14 missions that are in this game.
Yeah.
And pick one.
Last 2 years of your life. How did it go?
Yeah. So just to spoil the complete end level of the game. Sorry, Brian.
No, go for it.
So the final level, the Battle of Jakku, is enormous. It's the biggest, it's the most multiplayer feeling level we have, in that the map is huge. There's different objectives you can do in different orders. The scale of it is, it's a lot more in line and the most similar to the old Battlefront games, where you're like hopping out of your X-wing, spoilers, and doing all these things to finish different objectives, hopping back in your ship, flying around, shooting enemy starfighters, landing somewhere else. It's the most broad and dynamic and imposing mission that we have, I think. And from a narrative perspective, we needed to figure out how can we, in a level that is, 1, a desert, 2, an enormous war, create interesting things for the player to do, things that propel Aiden's story forward, and make her feel like an efficient and compassionate commander, but also are different than things we've done before, not only in terms of scope, but just, we tried to shake it up so every mission had very different things going on aesthetically, that the levels didn't feel like you were, I'm doing this beat again. This structure is really familiar. And because we did so much, because it's Star Wars, right? We had to lead with the script a lot of the time, and that's not really how games are made a lot of the time. And it's hard. It's really hard to lead with the script, because what it means is you have this idea of what the narrative is going to be, then the realities of making something fun changes that pretty fundamentally, and you have to go back and do a lot of iteration. So Walt and I constantly, and we accepted this very early, because Walt is a smart guy. He's made a lot of games. He understood that this process, as good as it is for us as writers to like, we get to be first, it wasn't going to work. So we had to prepare for a lot of iteration and churn and rewrites, and we embraced it, and it just made for stronger narrative within the levels, because as a designer starts to lay things out and art starts to arrive, you kind of, the way you think about what the level is changes, because now in your mind the story was just about the people, and now they're in a place, and the place has things in it that you should be talking about, and events that are happening in the background that you should have them acknowledge. Because if you have something crashing nearby you and somebody doesn't acknowledge that, it's a little weird.
I know it's hard to quickly think of an example, but like, is there a specific time when you had a story laid out, and then when the art came back, or when maybe the team came and said we can't do a certain thing, that changed the way you felt that story would play out in a level?
Yeah, I mean, without getting too much into the specifics, because I'm really happy with how things ended up, and a lot of the time, you make changes like that for the better, because things are, something isn't quite working. How can we make it work? Let's trim it down. Let's take something from here and move it over here. Our Luke Skywalker mission on Imperial. So we have this new planet called Imperial. It's made of like coral, and it's very oceanic, and it's super lush and beautiful, but we spend a lot of time like inside caves.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to basically take two characters from opposing viewpoints with Luke, who's like kind of in the rebellion, but also like he's kind of over it. He doesn't really care about war. He doesn't want to fight anymore. He's like, I have Jedi stuff to do. That's really important. I'm going to go do that. See you later. And to come into contact with someone who's in the Empire, who knows who he is, he's enemy number one. This is the guy who blew up the Death Star. He's notorious, and he's a Jedi. Like, this guy is everything that I, as somebody in the Empire, think is wrong in the galaxy. So to put those two guys together in, like, basically something inspired by Enemy Mine it's hard to create a situation where you can make those two coexist, do things together, bond, even if it's not becoming friends. It's just like, okay, well, we'll keep each other alive, and that's just where we're going to draw the line. That's really hard, because if you do it too quickly, then it's not believable that they're connecting and that Del could learn something from Luke. If it takes too long, you might reach the point where it's like, well, okay, one of them is going to kill the other one soon, right? Like, there's only so much you can do there. So I know that was like a really vague answer, but that one went through a lot of changes narratively and with the level design to kind of make sure that it felt as true to Luke Skywalker as possible, and that it was also in service of Inferno Squad's story.
Yeah, it sounds like it has a lot to do with pacing.
I can actually jump off that level, because I noticed you and Walt on Twitter were sharing Heather Alexandria's story over at Kotaku, where she talks about how that's the level that gets Luke right, which is something I really agreed with, and I was actually relieved when I hit that level and sort of found Luke not as a caricature of how he is in A New Hope, but sort of like an exploration of who he is in like the first days after Return of the Jedi, as this kind of older, calmer person who's not super angry at Del when he meets him. I want to build on Heather's praise for that scene and just ask, like, when did you realize that you were working with something different here, where working through, Luke at his most heroic involved making a character who wasn't like other video game heroes? How did you feel when you realized you were making something that wasn't like other stuff you'd seen in games?
Yeah, I mean, this connects really well to the earlier question about, your friend who feels a little uncomfortable wearing his Imperial gear this year.
Yeah.
In a game about a villainous entity like the Empire and people who fight for it and represent it in a positive way, it was really nice in a game about heroism and heroes and goodness in the galaxy to get to do something like Luke Skywalker. And we originally, when we said to Lucasfilm, like, hey, we want to do a Luke Skywalker mission, and they said, cool, why? We said, oh, because it would be awesome. They were like, okay, cool, that's not an answer. Why don't you come back with one? Because they don't want to do anything frivolously, right? Like, they don't want to just, and especially with someone like Luke Skywalker, you don't just get to throw that dude around and say, Luke Skywalker story. You need to do something significant to justify having a kind of story like that. So for us, it was two things. It was, one, we got to do a Luke Skywalker story that felt significant, not only for our character Del, but for where Luke is going. He finds an object that has a significant story to be told. And then it also just, we got to write the most compassionate, good guy in all of fiction. And that felt really good to especially like this year, being able to talk through someone like Luke Skywalker who spared someone's life because he asked, right? Like, why are you helping me? He's like, well, you asked for help. I'm just going to do that. I'm going to help you.
Do you think more game heroes could stand to be like Luke in that sense? That's a silly question, but also, like, I think...
No, but I get it. I think a lot of characters in fiction could be more like Luke. I think we see... And obviously, there are places for anti-heroes, there are places for deeply flawed characters in all of your Game of Thrones. But I love someone who's like Luke Skywalker, who is pure and clearly has his flaws, and I anticipate we'll see a lot of those flaws exposed in The Last Jedi. He's someone who's just... He's learning, and I feel like that's something that that is really important in any character arc is growth and change, and you can see Luke do that in every Star Wars movie. The way he talks, the things he says, the way he says them. You could identify, if you took Luke Skywalker lines from any film, if you didn't know they were his lines, you would know, like, oh, these are different people, right? You would think those lines are from a different individual, or at least from somebody who is older. And you see that in Jedi. He's definitely more wise. When he goes to Jabba's palace, he's very monkish, and he's very chill, and he's not as extreme like he was with Yoda, where he's like, "No, I've got to go, I got to leave," and he just takes off. He's measured, and he's calculated, and he's matured. And then after Jedi, the guy loses his father, who redeemed himself. He loses Yoda, his mentor, who was kind of his only connection to the Force besides Vader. He finds out Leia's his sister. The Emperor is killed. The Death Star is destroyed. He's going through a lot of stuff. He's processing a lot while being in this monkish phase of his life. So getting to write someone who is figuring stuff out in a mature way, who is also incredibly compassionate and purely good, was just nice.
I'm going to springboard off that because you mentioned having to go to Lucasfilm and get sign off for a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to sort of ask what was it like working with Lucasfilm, and the answer is probably it's great because Everett, a lot of things about working with Lucasfilm, and they seem to be pretty chill about letting writers do their thing. But I wanted to ask, Star Wars EU used to be one of the weirdest things out there. Like Alex before this chat mentioned the horsehead guy of Wraith Squadron.
His name is Runt. Thank you. Technically Hohash Ekwesh.
I hope he shows up again. I hope we bring Hohash back. What did you think? What were sort of like? Did you take any of that weird inspiration when you were trying to make this game? And I'm curious if Lucasfilm either said no, that's a little too weird, or if they said, oh no, that's the right kind of weird, bring it in.
So we very specifically, when we set out to do this, Walt and I had been I'd been reading everything, all the new stuff, all the new canon.
Yeah.
And Walt kind of had, he was keeping up with some of the cool stuff. I'd given him some recommendations. He was reading some of the comics. He read the novels that I really liked. But it wasn't until production when he was like, oh, okay, if we're going to write this story, if we're going to get into pre-pro on this Star Wars story, I need to know as much as possible. So he starts binging the Clone Wars. He starts reading all the books. He starts going into all of this stuff. You just have to absorb it all. Neither of us really went back to the old EUL. We didn't really go to Legends.
Nor should you.
It's weird, right?
There's some up and down there, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really good up. But it's so different than what Star Wars is, because at the time, George Lucas didn't even really consider that, right? All the stuff with Karen Travis's Mandalorian novels, and the reason she left Star Wars was George went in a completely different direction with Mandalore.
Yeah.
Because, I feel like he cared about it. It was his thing. Totally justifiable. The new Star Wars stories are a lot more like that, where it's controlled in a way that is for the benefit of the universe. I think that we didn't go back to too much of that because we'd already consumed it, years ago, whenever we had read whatever we had read. But we also didn't want to rely on it. We didn't want to go back and say what happened in that Han Solo trilogy that we can take out? What can we use from that? We didn't want to steal plot points from other stuff, especially because we were connecting so closely with Shattered Empire, which you can see happening right now with Operation Cinder.
That's Chuck Wendig's books?
No, Wendig's books with Aftermath. And those detail a lot more of the stuff.
Shattered
after
Empire
Jedi.
Is which book again?
Greg Rucka's comic.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry.
About Poe Dameron's mother and her connections to Luke, Leia, and Poe Dameron's father, Kess. And all of this Operation Cinder business comes from there, and the messenger droid, who's very intimidating. All of that stuff comes from there, and that was going to be our anchor. Because if you're in the Empire and you're Special Forces, and there is retaliation after Return of the Jedi, you can't skip that. It's too important. So,
can I ask you a silly question?
Please do.
Why does the main character's dad have 2 rank cylinders?
They all do. All the officers
they all do?
Yeah. So it's they're code cylinders. They're basically keys. And they're basically this is for my office and this is for my whatever.
That's pretty good. I like that.
Or maybe they're just nice pens.
They're combination top secret keys and sweet pens.
You actually
vapes.
You did have a fun story before the stream. So the ship they're flying, again, I have mentioned X-Wing miniatures far too many times on this stream, but you did say this ship was made in the X-Wing miniatures game, and you actually had a fun story about how you were looking for ships, and it turned out someone on your team said this one will work for your story.
Yeah, so when we were trying to figure out like, what is a good medium-sized ship for an Imperial squad? Okay, well, like a Lambda shuttle is too small. You can't have a crew. You can't really do anything. It's not a home.
Mm-hmm.
A Star Destroyer is way too big. You don't need, 3 people on their droid and a crew to occupy a ship that holds 5,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't. So we were trying to figure out what is it. Can we design something? We tried some concepts, and we were trying to work out. Is there like a cool Imperial dropship? Nothing was really working. And one of our level designers, Nick, he just stands up and he holds up this ship and he says, "Hey, this thing's really cool. It's from the tabletop game. How about the Raider?" And it was perfect. It was exactly what we needed. It was the right size. It was the right shape. It had aesthetically exactly what we needed, where, our people are in pilot gear. It has like TIE interceptor wing looking things on the side. It was exactly what we needed. And everybody saw that Raider from the tabletop game. Yep, that's the one. That's the ship. We're done. End of conversation. Search ends here.
Sorry, this Shriv line was really funny.
And they all are.
Yeah.
He's my favorite. He's my favorite dude that we got to write, man. Shriv is my favorite character in Star Wars.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to thank you. You got your narrative design here for a second for helping me segue to another question. So General Calrissian is dropping in here for the story, and like we mentioned earlier, you do get to play Luke Skywalker. So it's interesting how the story, interweaves with the characters from the films and doesn't just stick to telling its own perspective.
Sure.
I was reading up on some of the reporting being done on the closed Visceral game, and it's sort of like, I guess the question I have has to do with the fact that, like, is from a sort of broad game design standpoint, do you all feel that games like this, like these big story-focused Star Wars games, need to include characters of the original cast, or the audience just won't get it? Or do you sort of feel that, like, you can be confident with your original characters? Because there was one quote about Chewbacca that stuck with me, and I think has been a balance that Star Wars writers have been trying to figure out for a long time.
So I think you see it especially in the comics and in the novels.
Mm-hmm.
You get a little further away, right? They inch away from the iconic characters that you know.
Like Gonk Droid over there.
He's the best character.
Yes.
You get a little further away. You get a little closer to original stuff. New planets, new places, new ships, new races, new characters, all these things. Because that's what you would expect. You would expect the extra material outside the film to broaden what you already know.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. With games, it's the same thing. You definitely want to add new characters, and we always knew we never wanted to have... If we were going to do a Battlefront game about a soldier, we wanted it to be an original character. We never wanted to do... let's take... What's Captain Rex up to? He's a soldier. Let's use him. We wanted to have an original character. And I think you're going to... I'm very curious about Rian Johnson's new Star Wars trilogy in this way, for the same reason you're asking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you don't have a point of reference to characters and planets and things that you know,
mm-hmm.
will it feel like Star Wars? And I think that, yes, it could be done. I think it will be done eventually, right? I mean, eventually we're going to exist in a period of time in the universe where these characters don't exist, or they're not around, or they're far away, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to hit a point where we can't rely on Luke Skywalker. But I wonder how much of it is going to be, okay, now it's Rey and Finn.
Mm-hmm.
And how much of it is going to be, well, no, it's the new characters from the new trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're always going to see, because it's connected tissue, right? Star Wars is a single story, and Battlefront 2 is a chapter in it, and the same with The Last Jedi is a chapter in it. And you have these connective pieces in a galaxy that is really big.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's somebody as important to the galaxy as Luke Skywalker, or just something as iconic and notable from a smaller perspective, like a Gonk Droid,
mm-hmm.
or a Wookiee. If you see a Wookiee, it's like, now it feels like Star Wars. But I don't think you necessarily need to have Chewbacca around to understand, like, I know that guy.
Yeah.
So, we talk about chapters. Let's talk about this new chapter in your career. Now that you're on the other side of that line, that some people cross over, some don't. Like, I wonder, how has your perspective changed on the practice of making games, right? And that's like, I'm sure you've asked that question yourself in the past to others, but as this your first major project is out, it's released, you're watching people in the press sort of talk about it and converse about it. How has your perspective changed at all on projects like this, and if so, how and why?
I guess it depends from like the perspective of what, right? Like from the perspective of how a game gets made, yeah, super skewed, very different perspective. Because now I know the level of communication and the coordination between disciplines and all this background stuff that honestly it's like not even that super interesting to talk about, because it's the day-to-day of making something.
But this is Gamasutra, like
this is our business,
Scrum meetings
that's
are
true.
our forte.
That's true.
Are you guys agile? Tell me how agile you are. What's your agile process?
Yeah. So now you threw me off.
Sorry.
I'm trying to work my way back to the question.
Yeah.
So let's give a practical example, right? So this game, there's reviews coming in. What is it like to see something that you've worked on reviewed, and how has that changed the way you look at the game industry as a whole?
It's so weird seeing that kind of thing, and separate from like the first thing I did was read the IGN review, because that's where I spent 5 years of my life working, right? So like I care, and it's like the guy who reviewed it is like somebody I don't know, and there's a big disclaimer at the top of the review that's like, I don't know this guy, he used to work here, no, I never met him, because that becomes a weird thing, right? But it's still like, that's still kind of home. And then I started reading like all these other reviews from all these other outlets, because I'm really interested to hear what Polygon has to say and what all these other websites have to say. And Heather stuff on Alexander and Heather Alexander's stuff on Kotaku, that they've been breaking out like different features. I've been reading that obsessively, but it also gets to be a little bit much. It gets to be overwhelming to just consume nothing but like, I made this thing for so long, and now all I want to do is read about the thing that I made. Right. Even though like I know the answers to these questions. It's surreal and overwhelming, is the shortest answer I can give. But it's just really emotionally different to see, like, obviously, because it's like I invested in this, and me and a bunch of my friends worked really hard for many, many, many months to make this one detail like really good. Nobody noticed it, or if somebody did notice it, it's the best high of your life.
Yeah. I think you get a real deep appreciation for tiny touches and flourishes, like specific textures, little additions, like funny animations, when you are, living and breathing alongside a team of people for years of your life on a
and
single project.
Even now, like when you play other games, once you have an exposure to have the process, it's like, oh man, like somebody had to script that line to play that time if I did this one specific thing. And those are details that, if the game responds to your input in an unexpected way, it's really surprising. We tried to have a bunch of that, especially in some of the more social areas, and the less linear open area places where you could make like crazy decisions and do interesting things that are unexpected. And we wanted to be able to give back to you in that way.
Yeah, so I think a lot of devs face the challenge of putting work that they've sunk, pieces of their life into, and then not really seeing it get touched on at all. No attention, no sales, no whatever. But some devs deal with the exact opposite. I think you're probably in that camp. And so I wonder, now that the release is, not fully behind you, but you've been through it, the initial wave is over. Like, what would you advise other devs who might be putting out a game that is getting a lot of attention, right? Like how do you as a human being handle dealing with all of that feedback? And how do you switch off when and if you need to?
That's been the past couple of weeks, right? It's
maybe you say no to interviews with Gamasutra.
No, of course not.
Never.
With Gamasutra. No, I think you have to take it in stride. You have to listen to it. You have to not necessarily take it all at face value, right? Because a lot of criticism can be kind of caustic and not useful. But if you can learn something from it, then it's valuable. And if it's positive, great. Reinforce the idea that we should do more of this. If it's negative, then maybe kind of absorb that and let it kind of fuel future decision making. You don't have to let it drive everything you do, but there is stuff to be learned. And you do kind of have to learn to filter out stuff that, I fundamentally disagree with this criticism. I'm just going to let it go because I'm not going to change this person's mind. And that's their response to the game that we put out, and that's perfectly fine because everybody's going to respond to it differently, and you just have to accept that it's not always going to have the intended effect, no matter what. But in our case, we were super lucky that it did, because people are so emotionally engaged and attached to something as powerful and big as Star Wars that if you get it right, it's going to make people feel really good. And I feel very happy and relieved that people are really into Inferno Squad and Aiden and Janina's performance. It's like our dumb jokes with Shriv that we're so happy we got to do.
Yeah, that's good. That's nice to hear. I wonder. I know it's still a little early, but
Alex, can I step on your foot a little?
Sure, go for it.
Do two things. One, we've only got about 10 minutes left, so chat if you have any questions about writing for games, about narrative design, about making AAA games. Toss them in now. We'll try to get them in. And I'm actually going to flip the question we just asked you on its head, Mitch. You have two journalists on the line here, alleged journalists in my case. Dodge the Star Destroyer.
I believe in you.
Anyway,
you can do this.
No comment.
The question I have is, like, now that you've walked both paths and you really know the perspective of people who sort of, because a lot of journalists do make this jump that you've made. What's your sort of feedback back to journalists that you go back to IGN offices and talk to your old colleagues? Like, what would you say to them about what you've learned from the game dev side?
I don't think any of it's even different than what it was when I was an editor, right? Like when I would get an article that I'm going to, okay, you wrote this review or this feature or whatever, I'm going to sit down and we're going to basically talk about it. Any feedback I give now would be the same as them, which is just clarity and reasoning is the most important thing. I remember we were doing a podcast, I can't remember who it was with, but somebody uttered the phrase lazy developer because they just didn't like something. And I was like, like that stings. And I'm in the press. Like, that's not my thing. I didn't make that. I have no emotional attachment to it. I'm not invested in the success of this thing. But it just stings, the idea that anybody would do anything half-assed in game dev. Because it's just, especially like having seen people just work themselves to death making something great and being excited to do it, is like, nobody is trying to do something bad ever. And I would give that note a lot. If it's like, it seems like nobody cared about this feature, it's like, time out, man. Yes, somebody definitely cared, and sometimes things are out of your control. So I think that the thing that I talk to my friends in the press about now is there's a lot of assumed knowledge, and there's a lot of people talking about things with authority that are wrong. And it's okay to ask questions, and that's why I got here. Is I didn't know anything about writing video games, so I just asked people, hey, how do I do that?
Yeah.
What's that like? And that's okay. It's like, it's okay not to know everything.
Yeah, that's insightful. Alex has a question in the chat. Can you grab it for me, because I'm dogfighting?
Absolutely. J. Reed Vic 7 has an important question, Mitch. It is, how difficult was it writing an original story and then incorporating it in tangible level design from a core game experience that was geared towards multiplayer? Was there any meaningful overlap with DICE and their multiplayer level design when you were doing campaign design?
There was some. A lot of it is, I think a Takodana level is the most notable one, where the layout is very similar.
Yeah.
There are specific locations, but we definitely take that level, especially the cantina, and it's laid out a little bit different, like the foundations of it, because Maz Kanata's castle is Maz Kanata's castle. You can't change it. But the way we kind of we change the flow to move you through the cantina and see things that we want you to see is a little different. The building blocks of DICE's multiplayer maps were definitely something that we relied on. In the same way we relied on the fundamental gameplay and input and output of the controls and the way the characters move and feel, all the 3Cs, the character controls and camera. That was all super vital, because we wanted to have a game that when you played the single player, it didn't feel like, oh, this is a different game. This is weird. It doesn't feel like Battlefront that I've been playing for 150 hours online. But we also didn't want to rely on, well, let's just take the multiplayer map, throw some bots in it, and then but some dialogue makes it a story. The end. So anytime we had to rely on using a map that existed, we would do our best to make it make sense. One, with the story being told. Two, to make it as interesting as possible for the level designer working on it, because they want to have ownership over it. Now, obviously, that's important, and allows you to do versatile things with a space. And I had a third one, and it escaped me.
No worries. Ed will come back to you as we sort of segue into another question here in chat from Warren EBB. who'd like to know, did you feel the need to change the way storytelling is done in games? Or more interested, or were you more interested in refining the existing approaches to storytelling in games?
Woof.
Yeah.
Broad. Daunting. There was no... So fundamentally, right, we're telling a Star Wars story. There is a very specific way that Star Wars stories are told. And we wanted to do things a little differently. We have a story that takes place over many years, seen from many perspectives, and you stick with those perspectives because you're playing these characters. So that was a little weird and different for Star Wars. We changed perspectives on two different sides of the war, and getting to do that. And then, our epilogue, we fast forward a long time in the future. We, going into it, knew we wanted to do these things. We knew we wanted to hit these key events. We knew we wanted to have these beats and moments for our heroes. And we also knew that that's not really how Star Wars works. And it wasn't really until we got out of the theater seeing Rogue One that a lot of the decisions we were making and the risks we were taking felt like they would work. Not because they felt like Rogue One, but just that Rogue One made Star Wars... It was a different movie, right? Like, that... There's no wipes. You have the lower thirds popping up to tell you locations, which is very helpful. The composition of many shots and the way things are done, it didn't feel like a Star Wars film in the same way that others did, but it still felt like Star Wars. And it proved that you can do risky, weird, different experimental things in a universe people know intimately and still have it resonate. So that was a big sigh of relief for us, but also it's exciting because we do things that no other Star Wars story has done, and that was important to us more than changing the future of video game storytelling.
Maybe next time.
Yeah.
Next project you do that.
Next project you can change the future of storytelling.
Easy.
Quick commentary. I wanted to say you guys use lower thirds in a way. Something that's caught by something entering this level is you identify Naboo as the Emperor's homeworld, which I think is just... all love to the Rogue One team. I think you guys improved on that because you used that little space to drop a little nugget about how the characters see this. Naboo is not Amidala's homeworld; it's the Emperor's homeworld. Of course, it would be. They're Imperials. That's how they would see it.
Yeah,
so.
You've got to think about it in the context of that was something that was important. Is how does the world at this time think about this? Right? It's not Naboo is many things, including at this point. It's kind of outside the Empire, I think. It's a little neutral, and the Empire has they don't have an iron grip on it, and they don't really worry about it. But Palpatine's from there, so they're in line.
Yeah. With that, I think it is sadly time to start wrapping things up, which is just a little sad for me because I just want to keep playing Star Wars all day. But job. Thank you all for coming to the Gamasutra Twitch channel. We've been super excited to have Mitch on today. The game is Star Wars Battlefront 2. You can see Mitch's work along with Walt Williams and the rest of the team. If you drop into the campaign mode, if you drop into the multiplayer mode, that is a different end of the game, but you can play that too. I like the Starfighter stuff myself. And yeah, Mitch, if they have any game dev questions for you, where should they hit you up at?
I'm on Twitter at MitchyD, and that is the place where I spend the vast majority of my time. Don't tell my bosses.
Deal.
And along with that, we would appreciate it if you all dropped us a follow for Twitch. If you scroll down and click the follow button, we're doing interviews with game developers all the time. Tomorrow we have the Battle Chef Brigade devs on to join us for a nice conversation about Battle Chef games.
I'm so happy for them. That game looks so cool.
Yeah,
that game's great.
Looks really cool. Can't wait to talk with them. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Bye.
Bye.
May the Force be with you.
I don't have any good Star Wars trivia.